In this video, we're going to be talking about Mesh Tools menu, and we're going to start with this Reset Axis tool, which is something I don't really use, but I'll show you how it works. So if I move it in here, my cube, I can reset it on an axis XYZ by using this tool. So go to Mesh Tools and scroll your mouse, right? And you can see it's going to jump from axis to axis. So Y axis reset, that's X and Z, right? You can also do it with keys X, Y, Z, and you can also press Shift C. You can see it here, right, to move the cube back towards origin. Now you could also move it with Alt G, which is a vanilla Blender shortcut. So I don't really find it super useful, but if you want to reset your mesh on a specific axis, that's the way to do it. This tool comes a little bit more handy when you are working with cutters. But honestly, I prefer to work with the new tool, which is Snapdot from Boxcutter. We talked about it in Boxcutter section. So if you haven't watched it, watch it now. Now let me show you. So if I run a cutter here and shift click to live, and I wanted to reset this cutter on a specific axis, I can select the cutter, shift select the cube or whatever object you're cutting, and go to this reset axis menu and scroll my mouse, and you'll see that the cutter is going to align. In addition, what you can do, you can move this cutter to the middle of this cube by pressing keys of the respective axes. So if I grab this cube and Alt M and shift it to glass with HardOPS, we're going to be talking about this Alt M menu later on. I just want to show you, where this cutter goes, because otherwise you can't see through the cube, right? And now if I select this cutter and select the cube and go to Q menu and reset axes and press X, right, Y, and Z, you will see that this cutter is going to get reset on all axes, which means basically you're going to jump back to the origin point of this cube. So that's how this tool works. But like I told you, I prefer to use the dots from Boxcutter because I can easily align my cutters to whichever place I want using these options here, right, of the alignment. So if I hold Control and draw a cutter, you see it's perfectly in the middle here. And I can do the same thing here. I'll hold Alt and draw a rectangular cutter, whichever direction I want. So, this is far more intuitive, and this is actually a later tool that was developed after this reset axis. Now you got other options in here, like for example, Control click is going to give you a line view, which is, you can hold Control, Shift, and Alt to rotate your cube. You got some other options here. We talked about it briefly, and you can access this tool here as well from Mesh Tools, going to this option here, so menu within a menu, right? And another one is going to be the last one here, Select Tool. Now Select Tool is an interesting one, though I don't really use it. I think it's easier to select things in vanilla Blender using stuff like Machine Tools and Mesh Machine, but you have it here if you want it. You're gonna get this parameter. You can increase it and decrease it by simply scrolling your mouse, and you can click different vertical edges, press 2 for edges, 3 for faces, and you can also hold Shift Control, just like in vanilla Blender, if you want to select multiple, edges, so you can just, kind of paint around and select stuff, right? I don't really see a point of this. I mean, you got W selector in Blender, you could do the same thing, really literally, right? And then you have a much quicker way of getting into different modes with machine tools. So honestly, I don't see myself using this tool at all. But feel free to play with it and discover all these options here. Most of them, 90% of them are just from vanilla Blender, but the Shift D option is interesting because it's going to enable you the debug kind of a setting, which you can also access through this Mesh Tool menu here. So if you go to, where was it? This one, Selection Option, Polygon Debug. This is going to toggle the polygon debug. I think we mentioned this before in one of the previous videos. You can access it from the operation menu. And if you're going to, divide your mesh and so on and so forth into triangles and n-gons, you're gonna start seeing different types of colors on your mesh depending on what mesh you're looking at. Obviously, n-gon's gonna be red, triangle's gonna be this yellowish and or green, whatever it is. I'm colorblind. And this kind of white bluish, whatever it is gonna be quads. and it's dynamic, so it's going to, you know, shift when you model. This is useful, but this tool also is included in their new add-on, TeamC's new add-on called nSolve. I have a video on YouTube on that, and that add-on is actually fantastic for, or much better than HardOPS in my opinion, for cleaning mesh and sort of fixing topology. And similar tool, identical really, is included there. So the next tool we're gonna talk about is actually really useful, and you cannot do this with vanilla Blender. It's impossible. So let me show you how I would use this tool. I'm going to create kind of a cutting, I mean not cut, but kind of like a bevel in here. And I want to cut this mesh here. So I'm gonna go to Shift V menu, and you want to set this from local to nearest edge. We talk about this menu in the box cutter section, so look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about, and turn on the dots, right? And we're going to cut this here like that, okay? So just slice it, press X and shift click to live. Actually, I don't need this cutter, so shift 2. So now let's just cut this one here like that, okay? And let's say I wanted to mirror this cut to the other side of this cut, right? Now you need to understand that this cut and this cube are one object. The data is linked and the origin point is being shared. You can't move this origin point here because this mesh doesn't exist. If I go to edit mode, I'm seeing a cube, right? So this mesh is a phantom, you know, geometry. It's just an illusion. It's a live modifier, right? So the only way to set origin point in here and fix its rotation so the mirror gizmo is gonna be actually oriented correctly, not following, because at the moment it follows the local orientation of the cube. What I want is, you know, for it to follow the orientation of this edge here, of this cut, right? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna click on this element here, this cut, and go to Q menu and set origin. And now if I'm gonna hover over the mesh here, you will see that we're gonna get these dots, and here this dot's gonna be colored. Now this one denotes the current position of the origin point, and again these two share the origin point, right? So we want to move this origin point here to this element. So what you want to do is you want to hover over, just be careful, you got to be precise, yeah, over this dot in the corner and drag your mouse holding left mouse button all the way here. And now don't release it, just unroll the H menu and you see this button F. The description is awful, only cats will understand this, but if you press F, the origin point is gonna jump here, yeah, and if you release, boom, now we have origin point here, okay? Now still the problem remains because the mirror is gonna rotate it, you know, incorrectly, but we're gonna fix it now. So let's run this tool again. Now you can do this in one go. You can see here you can press shift and hold shift and press left mouse button, but it's a bit fiddly, so I prefer to do it in 2 goes, you know, in 2 passes. So the second time we're gonna run this, we're gonna be setting rotation. So the way we set direction here, we're gonna be setting the orientation of the mirror. We're gonna be setting the orientation based on the direction in which we're gonna draw this line. So I'm gonna grab this dot now, okay, drag across here. You see that, look at the gizmo. You see the gizmo aligns with the edge. Now press R to set rotation, just like in H menu, and release. And now we got the correct rotation set to our origin point, and now I can use a mirror. So you can mirror the impossible using this tool. So now these options here, when you hold shift and control shift, etc., they're gonna be copying origins point the origins location and rotation, or just origins location, from active to selected. So if I select this object and shift select this one, it's a bit confusing. See, there's the origin point here of this cylinder and the cubes is in here. If I'm gonna run this tool, so select this, shift select this one, Q, and shift click on set origin, the origin point is gonna shift to the cube. So now if I'm gonna be selecting this cylinder and mirroring it, its origin point moved here and inherited the rotation of the cube. So you're gonna do this. And with Control and Shift pressed, right, you're gonna copy just the origin point, so the rotation will not change, so you can do stuff like that. You know, this could be extremely useful in very rare cases, but set origin is one of these tools that do the impossible in Blender, and I really like it. Now, next tool is gonna be two-floor. This is really easy. And when you have an object hovering above the plane, this construction plane, the grid, and you're gonna go here and two-floor, you're gonna floor it by, grabbing it by this bottom face, right? Now, interestingly enough, this tool will work when you're gonna have an applied location. So if I'm gonna go to Control A and apply location, so my origin point will jump to cursor, I can still run this tool, right? Whereas this one, the reset axis will not work, obviously, because my origin point is in here, and this tool works off of the orientation and location, of the origin point, whereas the two-floor works based off of the location in, I think, 3D space of the face itself, so of the geometry. So, it's a bit different. Okay, next tool is gonna be dice. Dice is interesting, especially when I run a subdivision on your model. So you wanna convert your hard surface mesh, n-gon mesh into sub D, then you're gonna need to run some, additional loops and, bevel support loops and, other edges on the mesh to create a quad-based mesh. We actually have a course on this that will teach you how to run a sub D properly on actually build with sub-D or model with sub-D from scratch using add-ons like HardOPS and Boxcutter. Some people think it's impossible. I simply used all kinds of add-ons to speed up the process, and they're fantastic for sub-D. People just don't know how to use these add-ons. But anyway, so, here let's just run this tool. So I'm gonna click on dice, and by default you will see these red edges. If you hover over your mesh, you're gonna see different colors, and they simply correspond with different axes. If I press Z, X, and Y, you'll see I'm gonna be enabling or disabling these. You can also press B for voxelization to sort of run these edges on all axes. And if I click, it's going to apply this network of edges to my cube from all directions, right? So this kind of gets me halfway there. Then I can just run a bevel, press Z to see the segment, scroll down, press P, flex this to 90 degrees, press A to adjust the size of the proximity loops, and I'm good to go. All I need to do now is apply the bevel, right? And I have to go to object view, because object mode, you can't apply modifiers in edit mode. There we go. And you see you got these, edges here on running on this mesh. And obviously I need to do some cleaning, but I can run sub D here with Control 1, and just obviously we're gonna need to clean some stuff here and there, but you can very easily run a sub D on your mesh. Another thing you can do with this tool is you can actually run a wireframe that's gonna allow you to see a little bit better when you're running your mesh. So let's say you got some additional loops on your mesh running somewhere here and I don't know, somewhere here, whatever. And you can't really see those in object mode. So what you want to do is go here and go to mesh tools and dice, right? And then once you're voxelizing or whatever, you can press W to enable the wireframe of this model to see how these edges should be placed. Now, another thing you can do is you can press Tab and open this kind of a floating menu. You know this menu, we used it in AccuShape, Array, Bevel Modifier, etc. It's the same thing. This menu, it allows you to pause it and sort of, look around how things look, etc. You can change the number of, segments here, etc. You can change it from lines to dots so it doesn't interfere with your mesh. And then you can just, use options to apply this. Now, this 3D projection, right, you can change to 2D, you see here, and it's gonna actually switch to a different view. And if you're going to move, press your middle mouse button and kind of rotate around your mesh, you can just project it from view. You can do the same thing by just running dice and then pressing V. And, this is kind of cool, but I would suggest doing this from orthographic view. So if I'm gonna run dice like this and press V, I can, precisely determine where I want these quads, and also they're gonna fill your faces perfectly, right? Which is really cool. So if I run this, it's gonna fit in. Now the issue is that this tool's gonna run this dice across your mesh. If you wanna add dice just to one face, which is also possible, you wanna do it in edit mode. So you wanna enter the face mode, align yourself to the face you wanna run it on in orthographic view, go to Q menu, and then you want to run dice V2 and then click, and this is going to apply the quads only to one face, which is kind of useful when you fixing topology on a specific, in a specific place, right? So this would be dice in a nutshell. That's all you really need to know. Shift scroll through presets doesn't really work. It's just the same thing, so I think it's just bugged unless I'm missing something, but that's about it. Now you could also use some additional keystrokes here, like with almost any tool in HardOPS. So for example, if you go into hold control and click, you'll enter immediately the voxelization mode, so you don't have to press B. Next one is gonna be smart apply dice, which means you can run a smart apply with dice at the same time. So when you go into alt click this, your modifier is gonna get applied immediately. And then you can adjust, the number of segments you want. Let's say we want that many, right? And you click, and you're gonna get these edges being projected onto your mesh. The only problem with dice is that you can't really move these edges afterwards, right? So, it's not really that great, especially when you're being more precise. I would suggest actually running a knife tool. So if you want to very precisely run some kind of lines on your mesh, just run a knife tool like this, and because you can adjust it, right? Like I told you in the box cutter section, you can pause it with tab, and then you can move it, right? You can move it on, there we go, on the y-axis. You can also scale it, right? So you can be very precise where you want these cuts and then project it, and then your object is gonna get slashed through. So it's, you got a bit more control, but obviously you will need to put a bit more work. Now again, the NSolve add-on is precisely for the purpose of retopologizing, so I don't think dice is, that of a useful tool anymore unless you just need it locally. But I would suggest you look into NSolve, and it's a cheap add-on, it's like $23 and has some really incredible tools. And some of its tools, gonna deliver operations that are literally impossible in Blender. Black magic, level kind of stuff. The last thing I'm gonna show you about dice is that you can enter this twist 360 mode, right? So you can see here when you press T, you can enter twist, which is the same tool, by the way, as this one. So if I'm going to go to dice and, dice my object on x-axis, then I can press T, and if I click, it's gonna enter this twist 360 mode. And I can adjust it moving my mouse left and right. I can press D for twice for the offset. You can scroll your mouse up and down, and and also you can press X to change the axis. Then you can press R and also F, but they not really, especially F doesn't really work as intended, I think. Let me just click that and show you how this twist works. So if I go to edit mode, you see this is all based on modifiers, so I can still adjust this cube here so I can edit it. For example, I could add a chamfer here, which is going to be reflected on the mesh. And when I apply it, it's going to create this nice kind of, round object. And the reason why it's round is because we have this dice running through. And when this cube gets deformed, right, it stretches. So because there is more geometry, it can bend and deform. Otherwise, you'll be very kind of, I'll show you a regular 360 with just a cube. So if I go to 360 tool, you see that's what's gonna happen, right? You see these kind of flat faces. The reason why I got nice shading here, kind of a smooth, is because of all these segments. Now, if I apply a bevel, you'll see that we'll have a bit of a problem. So let me just run a smart apply here. And I think this is bugged, because by default, when you're entering this twist 360 and you do not hold shift, you see, then the mesh should be merged in the middle. So all these segments, cube has faces here and here, right? If I remove them and I'm gonna run twist 360, it's gonna work fine, right? Or at least should work fine. Let me just see that. There you go. See, it works fine. But here we got this nasty shading problem. And the issue is that if I smart apply all these modifiers and go inside, you'll see we're gonna have a face, like a rogue face inside, right? Wait a minute, there we go. See, it's inside here, this one. It shouldn't be there, right? So the way to remove this is extremely easy. Like I said, I think this twist 360 is a bit bugged. You can simply go to edit mode and press 3 with machine tools and go here and enable face cleanup, and it's gonna clean the faces. And by the way, if you want this to work, you need to go to preferences and you need to go to add-ons, right? Machine tools, and you need to enable cleanup here, this option. If it's not enabled, the key number 3 will not work. But that's how you do it. And then, you peachy. So that's how it's done, okay? So that would cover the dice and twist 360 at the same time, because, this is exactly the same tool. The next tool we're gonna talk about is going to be array. And this one is very powerful. If I click this, you will see we're gonna get immediate displacement. You can toggle it with A. It's gonna toggle this modifier here on the right hand side, displace. And if you scroll your mouse up and down, you will add or deduct from this array, right? And if you press D, you can kind of pause the displacement. You can also reset it by just tapping 0, which is gonna reset the displacement to 0, right? Press D again, and You can also change the axis by tapping X. And lastly, what you can do, you can press R to change the, the angle, or sort of, how much of this circle, this array is actually covering, right? And that's about it. Now let me show you these options because they're quite interesting. A control click will allow you to create an array around 3D cursor. See, because by default, the HardOPS array is going to be created anywhere when you have the origin point of the object you're arraying, because that's where the empty is going to be created. So if I'm going to array this in here, even if it's rotated, right, it's going to follow the origin point orientation, which now is kind of, rotated. So if I'm going to go to Q and, write the array, that's what's going to happen, right? Which is pretty cool. But in addition to this, what you can do is you can array it around a specific, specific element of an object when you're going to move a cursor there. And now with machine tools, when I'm going to move the cursor, remember that the cursor has an orientation. You see, now it's following the orientation of the world axis. But if I move it to this face, which is rotated, right? So the orientation here is, twisted. Then the gizmo of the cursor will follow this rotation here, right? So let's move to face. Boom, right? You see that? So now when I'm going to be running array around this cursor, I can do that. So what I could do is grab, let's say, a cutter. So we're going to go to D menu and grab a circular cutter. Enable dots here. I'm going to run a line here in the middle. So I'm going to have a dot in the middle of this face. See that? Boom. I change to a cutter. And I'm going to cut it in, and let's just taper it, Shift T. And then I'm going to press GX and move it down here and shift click to shift it to live. So now what I can do is I can grab this cutter and array it around the cursor. So Q and mesh tools and control click. I press D to displace it back to, here, and then press X to adjust the axis, and Bob's your uncle, and you got the radial array around your face, which is bloody brilliant. And I'm using this a lot when I'm modeling, right? One of my most favorite tools. Another one's going to be arraying around the origin point of the object. So if this, this cylinder is rotated, right? And I wanted to use its origin point as a pivot point of my array, because now I have an active array running here on the cursor. I can't really move the cursor, because if I move the cursor, the array is gonna shift, because it's not applied yet, it's a modifier, so it's still using the cursor as a pivot point. So now if I'm going to grab another cylinder, and I'm gonna move it somewhere here, and then I want to first align this cylinder, right? Let me just make it longer and thinner with the rotations. I want to copy the rotation here. You can do this either with Vanilla Blender by clicking this object you want to rotate and shift clicking the object you want to rotate to, going to Control C, which will not work because our extension isn't enabled. So let's go to extensions and enable copy attributes menu, which is this one. Install this. There we go. Okay. And now Control C, and we're gonna copy rotation, then location, right? And you're good to go. Now you can do this quicker with machine tools as long as you have the align tool enabled. So again, in preferences, enable the align tool and click this one, shift click this one, Alt A, and you're done. Hang on a second, let me see this. Do I have it enabled? Let's go to add-ons and align is not enabled. This one, you need to have it enabled, otherwise it will not work. So now click, shift click, Alt A, done. It's quicker, you see what I mean? And you got this, you know, this menu here you can adjust. So now what I can do, since this is aligned in terms of location and rotation, I can array this around this object's origin. So click this, shift click this Q and go to radial array, and now shift click it and then displace it, and boom, right? Magic happens, and you can do shit like this, you know, build satellites or whatnot. Do you know what I mean? So that's really cool. So array in HardOPS is extremely powerful. You can also access this radial array from the HardOPS menu. So if you press Alt W to access this HardOPS bar, we're now in HardOPS menu, right? This one is a radial array. Now this one is a bit different because it uses dots. These are smart modifiers, so when you hold control, you can see they're dot based. They're a little bit different, so we're gonna be talking about them in the future. But this array, actually, I don't use it anymore because the one I'm using from the mesh tools is much more powerful. It was developed after this tool was developed, so it's, you know, this one's kind of like a remnant. But there are other interesting smart modifiers here. We're gonna be talking about it later on when we're gonna be discussing this top menu, okay? Now, next tool is gonna be taper deform. So let me show you this one, really cool toy. So if you click this, you're gonna start deforming your, you know, your cube or whatever you want to deform. It deforms anything, right? It's going to taper anything, any object. And you have different options, X, Y, and Z. You can, you know, shift the axis. You can scroll your mouse to do the same, right? You can also press W for accessing the wedge menu. So you can kind of create like a wedge sort of a shape. Now, obviously, you can change the strength, which is going to revert back to the original, you know, shape of the object. So now let me grab another cube and I'm gonna move it somewhere here. So G, Shift, Z, and I'm gonna run another taper deform here, and we're gonna shift the axis, because you can shift it, you can deform the top or the bottom, you see, by pressing the same axis. And I'm gonna do something like this here, right? And let me just nuke this one for a second. And then I'm gonna grab both. So select the lattice and the object, Shift D and Shift Z and move it somewhere here. And then we're gonna Shift D this, Shift Z and move it somewhere here, okay? Like this, right? And I'm gonna grab this object and maybe make it a little bit less, you know, less pronounced. And this one I'm gonna scale all together. So I'm gonna grab both and I'm gonna just scale it, you know, with S, right? Now, another thing we can do, we can drop them down to the floor. So go to Q menu and, you know, to floor, right? Then mesh tools and to floor and to floor. So now they on the same plane. Now what you can do is you can either select all of them and run this lattice regularly. So you're gonna run a lattice that's gonna deform them kind of uniformly, but you can also run it with Shift, which is going to add a lattice that's gonna deform them based off of the central point of all these objects. Okay, so watch. Like that, you see? This is pretty cool. So you could create some really awesome, I don't know, sci-fi buildings and just proportionally scale them, you know, if you wanted to with this. It's a pretty awesome tool. Cool, next one's gonna be sphere cast. Now this one is not very useful, especially with machine tools installed, because you have access to the quad sphere. So if you go here and grab a quad sphere, that's not a Blender default sphere, you know. That sphere is actually a quad sphere. It's a very different sphere from a regular Blender sphere, because if you go to sphere, UV sphere, right here, okay, you see the alignment of the geometry and how the quads are distributed. It's very different. There are no poles on this one. It's much better in terms of topology. So what this sphere cast will do, it will do literally that, but it will keep the modifiers alive, because this one has modifiers baked, whereas this one, which looks identical, right, after I apply the modifiers, it has the modifiers on, so you can actually change them. So it applies subdivision, and also sphere cast. So if I apply them, right, so I'm going to apply all, select them both and go to edit mode, they're identical. So if this is what you want, you know, the quad sphere final product, you just want to go here to mesh and quad sphere, you know, it's quicker. And you also, as you can see, have some options here to adjust it, okay? You can make it less or more dense. Next one, we're going to talk about curve extract, and this one is extremely useful. Now in object mode, I rarely use it. I use it mostly in edit mode, but I'm going to show you what it does in object mode, okay? So if I'm just going to run this on this cube as such, it's going to create, you know, kind of a mess of a pipe sort of a situation that, you know, leads to really nowhere. You can't really use this. It's an absolute dog shit, right? But things change when you have a plane, because if you're on a plane with a bevel, so I'm going to go to a bevel here and run this on corners, and I'm going to apply it, right? So now if I'm going to run this tool on this plane, if I'm going to click on curve extract, we're going to get this, which is really cool, right? It's a pipe. So if I press S for smoothing, I can smooth it out, and I can press, you know, W for wireframe, which is also good because, you know, you can see where you're overshooting. Remember, this is a curve, not a mesh. So if you overshoot and you're going to apply it, you're going to have a bad day. Right, so you want to see how dense and how close these loops are, right? So W is very handy. You can also toggle with V between different types of curves. By default is Bezier curve. I usually leave it on default. Another thing you can do, you can press F to create this kind of an effect, right? Then what you can do, you can press 1, 2, 3 for different profiles, and you can apply this, right? Let's go to local view. Now remember, this is a curve, not a mesh. It's a curve. So you can still revert back to, you know, to the curve, right? You can still adjust it. But once you apply it, Control A and visual to mesh, and then we're gonna clean this because the, you know, this geometry isn't super clean, you see. So let's press 3 to clean that, and then you can run bevel on it. You create something like that, which is really cool, right? Especially when you add a subdivision. So you can create some really interesting shapes with this for, you know, environments, pipes, whatnot. And the reason why I said I use it in edit mode, because I do, and in edit mode this is absolutely fantastic, and it will allow you to, you know, do things that normally are just a pain in vanilla Blender. Like for instance, if I wanted to run a pipe here, all I need to do is to go to Q and curve extract, and I'm done, right? S, and I'm moving on, which is brilliant. Another thing you can do with this tool, watch this, right? Let's say I wanted to fix this. I wanted to, you know, create more geometry and or combine it with other geometry. Let's say I had some edge here and I wanted to combine it with geometry. I can't do it because it's a curve. What you can do is go to Q, curve, and then X to nuke it, right? Select this thing, go to Control A, visual to mesh, and then you can manipulate with the actual mesh. For example, you could lower the resolution of bevel, and you know, or for example, I don't know, add more, you know, more of a pipe here like this, right? And then rerun a curve on it. So go here, go to mesh tools and curve extract, and you're back in business, right? Which is brilliant. So it's really quick and easy to work with. I absolutely love this tool. If you combine this with Cablerator, you know, you're devastating in terms of pipes and cables. I mean, it's just a joke. Now, other options here. So for example, if you shift click, right, you will convert selection to plate. Now this will only really be visible when I'm gonna be doing this on a plane. So if I go here and shift click this, you see what happens. I'm simply solidifying the plane. Now the difference between this and regular solidification is that I'm actually creating a duplicate. And this is again very useful when you're working on in edit mode. So let's say I have a mesh here like this, and I want to create a panel here out of this, right? Let's say this was, let me just run another loop here, and I'm going to use another tool that we're going to be talking about, which is called EM macro, which is basically extruding things in and out. So Q and Alt click on EM macro, move it inside, and then I'm going to grab the faces. So I'm going to go to face mode and shift curve extract. And this is exactly what this tool is doing. You see, it's going to be ripping off of this panel and solidifying it. So it's the same behavior, but in just object mode, right? Because you see, if I remove this, it's a panel, yeah? Solidified, so it's, you know, this is live, yeah? I can adjust it live. So that's curve extract in a nutshell. And I just bloody love this tool. I use it all the time. It's absolutely brilliant for hard surface. Cool, and next option here, let's see. Well, new object from selection is a bit redundant because it's Shift D. I don't even know why it's here. I mean, you just Shift D, I mean, you know, whatever, but it's there. Like I said, some of these tools in HardOPS are just completely redundant, but some of them are absolutely brilliant. Alt-Shift is going to be destructive to plate, which means, again, it's going to be the same thing, but the solidification going to be applied. So if I go here and, you know, Alt-Shift click this, once I apply it, it should apply the solidification, but it didn't, which is interesting. So maybe it's bugged, but it should be applying solidification because it's destructive, right? So, well, you know, there you go. But anyway, that's a curve extract in a nutshell. I use it because it's fantastic. Next one, face extract. This one is genius. And just like set origin, allows you to do things you cannot do in Blender. I mean, this tool is just mind-blowing. At first, first time I saw it, I was like, wow, that's wild, you know. So if I draw a cutter here, and let's say I wanted to create cuts in addition to these based off of these faces inside, and you know, these faces don't exist, right? It's a phantom geometry because it's a live boolean, so they don't exist. So what I would need to do in order to, you know, create additional cuts over there, I would need to work on this cutter, right? So I would need to, let's say, I don't know, select these faces, go to insert mode, right? Then press E, then Alt S, or alternatively, what you could do is go to EM macro, because that's what EM macro does. So you could go to Alt EM macro and hold Alt and click, which is going to press E, cancel with right mouse button, and then Alt S. That's what EM macro does, okay? And then I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna get this, right? But that's a lot of work. So, you know, what I could do instead is use face extract, and face extract will allow you to select these faces, which is, you know, they don't exist. So you're selecting something that doesn't exist, which is mind-blowing. So here, if I go to mesh tools and face extract, you have this menu and you can now select these faces holding shift. They're going to be highlighted red. And if I'm going to press space now and move my mouse, you see I'm going to be insetting this kind of a graphic. And if I click and move, now I'm literally booleaning this mesh physically, right? And if I'm going to go inside, I can press A to solidify inside, right? And A again. You can also change solvers, you know, E from fast to exact if you're creating some cuts that are, you know, a bit dodgy and you need a bit of a better solving in terms of booleans. In addition, you can press Z, just like in bevel, to see through, so you can see how deep you're cutting, right? You can press F to flip it, you can press 1, 2, 3 for different profiles, etc. And also solidify it. Now, if I'm gonna go through it, right, through with it like this, and apply it, okay, you will see that's gonna be the final result. But now what I can do, right, is I can cut the cutter, right? And get stuff like this very quickly, okay? Which, you know, in vanilla Blender would be a bit of a pain. Now, in addition to all these, you can also shift click it, which will basically rip off of these faces. So kind of like shift curve extract. You know, remember I showed you in edit mode. Again, we're gonna be talking about edit mode later. But here, if I hold shift and curve extract, it's gonna rip off this panel, right? So watch, this is similar behavior, but on faces that don't exist. So if I go here and I'm going to shift click it, if I select these faces, they're going to turn blue instead, not red. But now if I'm going to press space, I'm going to be ripping off of these faces that don't exist. So what I could do is create a shape out of a boolean that wasn't applied, which is, you know, bonkers. And then obviously you can run modifiers on, like, for example, solidification, right? So you can create stuff like that inside of your boolean. So this boolean is still not applied, but you can already create shapes inside of it using the boolean cut itself. And if you're going to initialize with control, you're gonna run a decimate on it, which decimate on it, which means it's going to decimate the mesh before running the tool. Decimate is just simply a modifier that's going to reduce the number of mesh when you have a subdivision applied to your mesh. But honestly, I never use it. But other than that, this tool is superb. So let's continue to the next tool, which is going to be Smart Apply. And this one is a bread and butter of HardOPS workflow for hard surface. You're going to be using it all the time. Now, listen carefully. You got to be really cautious when you're using this tool. It's a little bit buggy sometimes, and also it sometimes behaves unpredictably. Now, I was talking to Master Z and recently to Jerry, and we talked about a few things, and they fixed one behavior based on my suggestion, which was applying the auto smooth. So the previous version of Smart Apply used to apply the smooth by angle, which was creating a problem. And the problem was basically sharp edges. So if I'm going to run a Smart Apply here, see, it's going to apply my hard edges. You see that? It's a problem. Now in Blender 4.4 Alpha, I got a new version installed that just dropped on the market. And this one doesn't do that. So hopefully you're going to be getting this version. But you see, I'm going to run a bevel here, and I'm going to run a modifier. The boolean, then weighted normals, mirror, and then I'm going to run a Smart Apply, right? You see, it doesn't apply smooth by angle, which is brilliant because now we don't have to deal with this sharp edge bullshit, right? However, there's a problem. So if you're gonna create a bevel that's a little bit too wide, a Smart Apply may think it's a structural bevel it's gonna apply it. So if I'm gonna run a Smart Apply now, there's a good chance, and in this case it didn't get applied, but there's a good chance that at some point this bevel gonna get applied. So really, you gotta be careful. Let me just run an array here. So array, and now try this. Okay, Smart Apply. Let's see what happens. Operation Smart Apply, and boom, see, bevel got applied. So you gotta be really careful. So the size of the bevel is also important, but by default, Smart Apply should not apply last bevel and weighted normal modifier. That's the default behavior. Another thing you gotta be careful with is the bevel weight. So when you're running a bevel and you're running it based off of the bevel weight limit method. So if I go here to sharpening method, and I'm gonna just turn these to off and keep bevel weight, and I'm going to run sharpen my cube, which will apply bevel weight to all the edges. If I now run a bevel, right, and switch it to weight, it's going to catch all these edges based on weight. So now if I'm going to run this mark here, doesn't matter what angle I'm at, the bevel is gonna be visible. Let me just run bevel weight here as well, so it's gonna be cleaner. Boom. You wanna continue with the bevel weight across the mesh, otherwise you're gonna get nasty shading. And when you run Smart Apply on this, occasionally it might get applied. In this case it didn't, but just be careful. But by default, this tool, okay, should apply every single modifier except for the last bevel and the weighted normal. So again, if you're running multiple bevels, remember, like you're doing this through step, right? So if you have at least 2 bevels, and if I'm going to run Smart Apply, the first one's going to get applied. So, again, be careful, right? So now let's look at other behaviors here. So you can hold Shift, right? Which will duplicate the mesh and clear last bevel and weighted normals. Now, why that would be useful? Well, let me show you. So if I'm gonna have a mesh here like this, okay, and I'm gonna run a mirror, and I'm going to run weighted normals, right? So we have all these essential modifiers. So now if I'm going to run the Smart Apply with Shift, right, it's going to apply the modifiers and nuke the bevel and weighted normals and duplicate my object, right, in one go. Why is this useful? Well, you could use it as a cutter, right? You cannot use meshes that have bevel running on them, bevel modifier, as cutters. It's a terrible idea, and I'll show you why, okay? So if I move this in here and I have a bevel modifier running on it, look what happens when I'm going to run a bevel, right? It's going to be an absolute disaster. So let me just move this on X. Here, there's a mirror running here. Hang on the other side. There we go. See this problem here in the corner? Let me just zoom in. Watch this. Yeah, this is what happens. So, and this is a minor issue. You know, you could have way worse breakages, but yeah, this is what's gonna happen to your mesh if you're gonna have a live bevel running on your boolean. You don't want to do that ever, right? So this is going to nuke the bevel weighted normal modifier, and it's going to prepare your mesh to become a cutter. So now what you could do is go to D menu with box cutter and go to custom cutters and, you know, use it as a custom cutter. And then you can just, you know, run it on a mesh as a custom cutter, right? It's not the best idea here because of the bevel, but if I'm gonna grab a regular cube, you will see my point, right? You know, you can do cool shit with it. So there you go. That's how, you know, how it works. Next one, let's just grab a plane and run a bevel on it, okay? And maybe a cut or something. And then we're going to go to Mesh Tools and Control Click, which is going to convert it to curve and apply all the modifiers, which is kind of pointless to be honest, because curve extract is going to do the same thing. So if I'm going to go to curve extract, you see I have booleans, you know, live here, right? It's going to do the same thing. So watch, boom, right? So, you know, pointless tool in my opinion, but there you go, it's there. So anyway, that's, you know, that's a smart apply in a nutshell. And the last option is completely useless because it's alt click and it's going to give you a step, which is this. We talked about it in previous video, and there's no point of going to menu inside of the menu to get to a menu, you know what I mean? Now, next tool on the list is going to be this one, which is auto smooth, and that's completely useless because all it's going to do is going to add a modifier, right? I don't know why would you need that if you simply can do it by, you know, adding bevel, which is going to be done automatically. And by the way, if you want to adjust the smooth by angle, you go to Q menu, shift click on sharpen and move left and right, and you can adjust it. So honestly, this menu is completely pointless in my opinion, but you know, it's there if you want it. And you can obviously change the angle, starting angle of the auto smooth, which I wouldn't mess with because first of all, you never know what angle you're gonna need, and I would stick to default because it simply plays nicely with the HardOPS modifiers and tools. So honestly, I would forget it even exists here. This menu we're gonna be talking about in a separate video. Same with this one. I don't even know why this one is here since it's the same as this. So, you know, redundant. And it's an Alt-M menu for mods. It's really easy and simple to use, but we're going to be talking about it in a separate video. Next one, let's talk about this one, Auto Unwrap. This one is pretty cool. So let's say you got a mesh here, and we're going to do something like this, and we're going to apply this with Control click on the sharp, and I wanted to unwrap this, right? Well, you would need to add seams to your mesh, then you would need to unwrap it. It's a lot of work. In HardOPS, all you do is go here and auto unwrap, and it's gonna even show you a preview, which is exactly the same as in here. Next tool is completely useless, and I'll show you why. If I run a boolean here like this, shift it to live, and I'm gonna go to mesh tools and HOPS reset. If I click this, it's going to reset that cutter to a mesh, right? So it's gonna nuke the cutter and reset it back to a mesh. I mean, I don't really know when you would need this. I think much better option and much more useful option would be to copy that cutter and change it to mesh and create a separate object, which is exactly what this tool will do. If you go to settings and shift click on shade solid, it's going to duplicate the cutter and create a solid mesh, you see, inside of it, look. And that's useful. Because, you know, this reset hops thing was, I think, created before we had Everscroll. Because now with Everscroll, I can recover my cutters, right? So watch this. I can go to Everscroll, and then if I select a cutter, which by the way, we're going to be talking in a separate video, I can go to Shift Bool. And Shift Bool is going to shift my boolean to different shapes, which in my case is going to shift it back to a full solid mesh for union boolean. So this reset thing is, you know, it's just too deep in the menu and too inconvenient in my opinion to do anything useful, but you know, it's there if you want it. Next tool is going to be polygon debug, and for this I just created this kind of a crazy cube here, so we're going to have a bit more complicated mesh, and we're going to go here to mesh tools and polygon debug and click. You will see that my mesh is gonna get highlighted based on the type of topology. So triangle is gonna be yellow, n-gon is gonna be red, and you know, quad's gonna be this kind of a bluish white, whatever. And it's dynamic, so if I'm gonna combine these two, they're gonna change into, you know, all these three gonna change into quads, yeah? So it's really cool to work like that. Another thing you can do is you can highlight specific type of topology. So for example, you wanna highlight, let's say, n-gons and tris, it's gonna do exactly that, right? It's gonna highlight them in different colors. The only problem is the colors change. They're gonna get a bit confusing. So it's also a bit psychedelic, to be honest. So, you know, a bit on the Disney side. So I rarely use it, but it's kind of useful when you fixing topology. Now that add-on I mentioned before, which is called NSolve, has exact same tool, and it's way more useful for fixing topology and retopologizing. So if you're interested in that kind of a workflow, I suggest you don't use HardOPS, you use that add-on, because it's better and more focused. Its niche is basically retopologizing hard surface mesh, n-gon mesh specifically, and converting it into quads. Next one's gonna be modifier scroll toggle. I don't really use this, to be honest. I mean, you can just simply, when you have modifiers, right, and let's say a bevel, right, and you can just, you know, toggle stuff on and on. Again, I find it completely useless, but you know, it's there if you want it. So here, bool mod toggle, so you can just toggle booleans in here, right, and you have different options in here as well. Then this one is gonna be scrolling just modifiers, so all of them, including auto smooth and bevel. And like I told you before, because we have auto smooth now, it creates this kind of a, you know, complete disaster of a mesh when you turn it off. So it doesn't really look good, so completely pointless. You can also cycle booleans. This one is kind of interesting when you want to recover booleans, but why would you need that if you can go to Everscroll, which is much easier to access, hold control, and you can recover all this, you know, all the modifiers you want. Much more useful in my opinion and much more practical. So this tool here is a complete waste of space, but that's my opinion. Next one is Everscroll. We talked about this, right? Everscroll, simply scroll through booleans, and that's about it. But we already talked about it. But the next tool here, which is this one, Align, this one is really useful. We also mentioned it, right? So you can click and simply, you know, rotate your view, hold Control, Shift, and Alt. The thing is, I don't really use it in object mode. I use it in edit mode. So when I'm, for example, in this kind of a situation and I want to align myself to this face, I'm going to go to Q, and then the menu changes because now I'm in edit mode. So it's going to be under mesh tools and go to align view, and then you can scroll your mouse, you know, holding Control, Shift or Alt, and you got other options in here, right? Like for example, Alt Z to toggle see-through, which is Blender option, you know, and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's very useful for aligning yourself to the shape. When you exit it, you're gonna have this disorienting kind of a plane. So simply hold Alt, press middle mouse button, and just swoosh with your mouse, and you're gonna be back in normal view. So let's continue, and next one is export. I don't use it. I use Ctrl S with machine tools, far more robust menu, including plasticity files, and also, you know, I can load the most recent, which is very convenient. I don't have to look for the damn thing. So the export menu for me does absolutely nothing. Two stroke is gonna convert your sharp edges to grease pencil, which I don't use, so I don't care. I don't even know if this works, to be honest, but you know, that's what it does. If you work with grease pencil, go ahead and have fun. And this one is this pointless timer, which, you know, again, does nothing really important. And that would cover the mesh tools menu. So, you know, there are very important tools in here, like set origin, essential, like radial array, essential, curve extract, essential, you know, face extract, very important, smart apply, essential. And these are the key tools that I will be using from this menu, plus maybe sometimes align view in certain cases, which is why again I right click here and assign a shortcut Ctrl Q, which by default is to quit Blender. Well, you know, you're not gonna be doing that, so that's why we can use this shortcut here. Very useful and very quick. Well, there you go, that's a mesh tools menu. I know this video is kind of long, but it's gonna give you a really in-depth view of all these tools. And in next video, we're gonna be talking about the Boolean menu. So when you have two objects selected, you click on Q, and here you have the Boolean menu, and obviously you got the Boolean difference by default at the top. So see you in next video.